You're in my seat. Arrogant man, bullies black CEO on flight, then learns his name. The Boeing 737 sat on the tarmac at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, its engines humming softly as passengers filed through the jetway. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the aircraft, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere was one of hushed, luxury leather seats, soft lighting and the faint scent of expensive cologne mingling with freshly brewed coffee. Marcus Williams settled into seat 2A with the practiced ease of someone who'd logged more flight hours than most pilots. At 42 years old, he carried himself with quiet confidence, his tall frame relaxed despite the chaotic morning he had had getting to the airport. He wore a simple charcoal sweater over dark jeans, deliberately casual for a cross-country flight to Los Angeles. The Wall Street Journal sat folded in his leather messenger bag, along with his tablet loaded with quarterly reports he'd review somewhere over Kansas. As the CEO of Williams Technology Solutions, a cybersecurity firm he'd built from a two-person startup in his garage to a company employing over 3,000 people across 12 states, Marcus was accustomed to high-pressure situations. But today he'd specifically chosen comfort over corporate armor. No suit, no tie, no obvious markers of status. After the grueling board meeting he'd endured yesterday, 16 hours of budget negotiations and strategic planning, he'd earned the right to fly in peace. He pulled out his noise-canceling headphones and his well-worn copy of James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, a book he returned to whenever he needed to recalibrate his moral compass. The flight attendant, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, pulled back in a neat bun, stopped by his seat. "Good morning, Mr. Williams," she said warmly, her name tag reading Patricia. "Can I get you something to drink before we take off, perhaps some orange juice or champagne?" Marcus smiled, appreciating the genuine courtesy. "Orange juice would be perfect, Patricia, thank you." "Of course, and may I say it's wonderful to have you flying with us today. My husband actually uses your company's security software for his medical practice. Says it's the best in the business." "That's good to hear," Marcus replied, his smile widening. "Tell him we appreciate his trust." As Patricia moved toward the galley, Marcus opened his book, letting Baldwin's powerful prose wash over him. Around him, other first-class passengers continued boarding, a businessman already typing furiously on his laptop, an elderly couple holding hands as they found their seats, a young woman with designer luggage who looked like she was heading to LA for pilot season. Then came the disruption. Richard Thornwell III entered the first-class cabin like a man accustomed to deference. At 56, he wore his entitlement like a second-skin expensive but slightly dated business suit, gold Rolex, catching the overhead lights, perfectly styled silver hair that probably cost more to maintain than most people's monthly grocery bills. His ruddy complexion and the slight wheeze in his breathing suggested too many expense account dinners and not enough time at the gym. His membership probably went unused. He stopped abruptly when he reached row 2, his small eyes narrowing as they fixed on Marcus. "Excuse me," Richard said, his tone already edged with irritation. "I think you're in my seat." Marcus looked up from his book, his expression calm and polite. "I don't believe so. This is 2A. See?" He gestured to the seat number, clearly visible on the overhead compartment. Richard's jaw tightened. "I can read thank you, but I always sit in 2A. I'm a Platinum Elite member and I specifically requested this seat when I booked my ticket 3 weeks ago." "I understand that must be frustrating," Marcus said evenly. "But I also booked this seat when I made my reservation. Perhaps there was a mix-up with the airline system. Why don't you check your boarding pass?" Richard pulled out his phone instead, deliberately avoiding his actual boarding pass. "I don't need to check anything. I know what I booked. This is my seat and I'd appreciate it if you'd move." Patricia returned with Marcus's orange juice, immediately sensing the tension. "Is everything all right, gentlemen?" "This man is in my seat," Richard announced loudly enough that other passengers turned to look. "I'm Platinum Elite, and I always sit in 2A. Always. I don't know how this person got assigned here, but there's clearly been a mistake." Patricia maintained her professional composure, though Marcus noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass, please?" Richard finally reluctantly produced his boarding pass from his jacket pocket. Patricia examined it with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Thornwell, according to your boarding pass, you're actually assigned to seat 2C, the aisle seat. Mr. Williams is correctly seated in 2A, the window seat. You are both in the same row. That's impossible. Richard sputtered, his face reddening. I specifically selected 2A. I always get 2A. Someone must have changed it without my authorization. I apologize for any confusion, sir, Patricia said smoothly. But seat 2A was already assigned when you made your reservation. Sometimes with high-demand flights, preferred seats do book up quickly. But 2C is also an excellent seat. I don't want 2C, Richard interrupted. Look, I don't know who this guy is, but I'm sure he'd be perfectly comfortable in the aisle seat. Some people, he added with unmistakable condescension, aren't particular about where they sit. They're just happy to be in first class at all. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest, that mix of anger and exhausted recognition. He'd experienced countless variations of this scene throughout his life, the assumption that he didn't belong, that his presence in spaces of privilege must be some kind of mistake or charity. Mr. Thornwell, Marcus said quietly, his voice controlled but firm. I'm quite comfortable where I am, thank you. And I'm particular about my seat selection, too. I booked the window seat specifically because I prefer it. Of course you do, Richard muttered just loud enough to hear. He looked at Patricia. Isn't there some kind of protocol here on Platinum Elite? Doesn't that count for something? Can't you ask him to switch as a courtesy? Patricia's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing a flash of something harder underneath. Sir, both passengers have assigned seats, and both are seated correctly. Mr. Williams has no obligation to switch with you. Unbelievable, Richard said, shaking his head. He threw his carry-on bag into the overhead compartment, and with unnecessary force making several passengers flinch. The customer service on this airline has really gone downhill. Platinum Elite means nothing anymore. Anyone can just buy their way into first class these days. He dropped into seat 2C with an exaggerated sigh, deliberately letting his elbow encroach into Marcus's space as he adjusted his position. Marcus said nothing, simply returned to his book, though the words on the page had lost their meaning. As the remaining passengers boarded, Richard continued his campaign of passive-aggressive behavior. He shifted constantly, each movement designed to invade Marcus's space. He sighed loudly. He made pointed comments to Patricia about standards and the way things used to be, and how some people just don't understand proper etiquette. When the flight attendant made her way through the cabin with the meal service cart, Richard's behavior escalated. I'll have the grilled salmon, he told Patricia, then added with false concern, though I'm not sure it's going to be up to the standard I'm accustomed to. Everything seems to be cutting corners lately. When Patricia set down his meal, Richard examined it with theatrical suspicion. Is this wild-caught or farm-raised? The salmon is wild-caught Alaskan, sir. Looks farm-raised to me. The color's off. He poked at it with his fork. But I suppose it'll have to do. Not much choice at 35,000 feet, is there? Marcus, meanwhile, had ordered the chicken and was eating in peaceful silence, still absorbed in his book. Or trying to be. Richard's running commentary made concentration difficult. Some people have no conversation skills at all, Richard announced to no one in particular. No social grace? Just sit there with their nose in a book like they're too good to interact with their fellow passengers. Of course, maybe they just have nothing interesting to say. Not everyone is educated in the art of conversation. Marcus turned a page, his jaw tight, but his expression neutral. He'd learned long ago that engaging with people like Richard only fed their need for conflict. Better to rise above to deny them the satisfaction of getting under his skin. But Richard wasn't finished. You know what your problem is? Richard said, suddenly turning to address Marcus directly. People like you don't understand how things work in places like this. First class isn't just about having money to buy a ticket. It's about class, real class, breeding, knowing how to behave. But I guess some people are just happy to have a fancy seat and a free meal. Doesn't matter if they actually belong here or not. Marcus slowly closed his book, his finger marking his place. He turned to look at Richard fully for the first time since the flight began. His dark eyes were calm but intense, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of controlled fury. Mr. Thornwell, is it? Let me be very clear. I understand exactly how things work. I understand that you're uncomfortable sitting next to me, though. You're trying very hard not to say exactly why. I understand that you believe your platinum elite status entitles you not just to certain amenities, but to a particular social order that you feel is being disrupted by my presence. And I understand that you think if you're rude enough, insulting enough, I'll somehow apologize for existing in a space you believe belongs exclusively to people who look like you. Richard's face went from red to purple. Now listen here. No, you listen. Marcus continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone which somehow made it more powerful. I paid for this seat. I'm sitting quietly bothering no one reading my book and trying to have a peaceful flight. You, on the other hand, have spent the last hour trying to make me uncomfortable, making loud comments about who belongs where, questioning the quality of airline food you're perfectly capable of refusing, and generally acting like a child who didn't get his way. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit in your assigned seat, the one you actually paid for, and you're going to stop talking. And I'm going to go back to my book. Are we clear? Several nearby passengers had stopped pretending not to listen. The businessman across the aisle had paused his typing. The elderly couple 2 rows back were watching with undisguised interest. Richard sputtered, "Do you have any idea who I am? I'm the vice president of corporate acquisitions at Thornwell Industries. My family has been in manufacturing for 4 generations. I have connections at the highest levels of—" "I don't care," Marcus said simply. "I truly don't. Your credentials, your connections, your family history, none of it gives you the right to treat another human being with disrespect. This is outrageous. I'm going to report you to the captain. You're being aggressive and threatening." "I'm being aggressive," Marcus's eyebrow raised. "I'm sitting in my assigned seat speaking calmly after enduring an hour of your passive-aggressive commentary and your attempts to make me feel like I don't belong here. If anyone's being aggressive, sir, it's you." Patricia approached, clearly having heard at least part of the exchange. "Gentlemen, is there a problem?" "Yes, there's a problem," Richard said immediately. "This man is harassing me. He's being confrontational and making me feel unsafe." Patricia looked from Richard to Marcus, her expression suggesting she knew exactly what was happening here. "Mr. Williams, have you been bothering Mr. Thornwell?" "I've been reading my book," Marcus said calmly. "Mr. Thornwell has been providing running commentary on the decline of standards in first class, among other observations." "That's not, I wasn't—" Richard struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't make him look bad. "I was simply making conversation." "If by conversation you mean making repeated comments about who belongs in first class and who doesn't," the businessman across the aisle interjected unexpectedly, "then yeah, we all heard your conversation. And for what it's worth, ma'am," he nodded to Patricia, "this gentleman," he indicated Marcus, "hasn't said a word until this guy pushed him too far. He's been nothing but polite." "That's right," the elderly woman 2 rows back added. "This poor man has been trying to read his book, while that one," she pointed at Richard, "has been making nasty comments for the past hour." Richard's face had gone beyond purple to an alarming shade of crimson. "This is a conspiracy. You people are ganging up on me because I dared to speak up about maintaining standards." "Sir," Patricia said firmly, "I'm going to need you to lower your voice and calm down, or I'll have to involve the captain." "Fine, get the captain. I want to file a formal complaint anyway. This man," he jabbed a finger at Marcus, "has been hostile from the moment I sat down." Patricia sighed. "Very well, please wait here." She disappeared toward the cockpit, her expression suggesting this was not how she'd hoped this flight would go. The cabin had fallen into an uncomfortable silence, with most passengers trying to pretend they weren't listening while clearly hanging on every word. Marcus reopened his book, though he knew he wouldn't be able to concentrate now. His heart was pounding, adrenaline flooding his system. He'd handled the confrontation well, he knew that, but it didn't make it any less exhausting. Didn't make it any less infuriating that he still in 2023 had to justify his existence in spaces that people like Richard Thornwell considered their exclusive domain. Beside him, Richard sat rigid with indignation, periodically muttering under his breath about political correctness and reverse discrimination and the good old days when people knew their place. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes, Patricia returned, followed by a tall man in a captain's uniform. Captain James Reynolds had the weathered, confident look of someone who'd been flying commercial jets for decades. His salt and pepper hair was cropped military short, and his blue eyes missed nothing as they assessed the situation. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying natural authority, "I understand we're having some difficulties." "Captain, thank goodness." Richard jumped in immediately. "I need to file a complaint about this passenger. He's been hostile and aggressive, making me feel threatened. I'm a Platinum Elite member, and I don't appreciate being harassed on one of your flights." Captain Reynolds nodded slowly. "I see. And Mr. Williams, do you have a response to these allegations?" Marcus met the captain's eyes steadily. "Captain, I've been sitting in my assigned seat reading my book and trying to have a peaceful flight. Mr. Thornwell has been making comments for the past hour about who belongs in first class and who doesn't. When I finally asked him to stop, he accused me of being aggressive." "He's lying," Richard interjected. "I was simply making polite conversation, and he became hostile for no reason. I think he has some kind of chip on his shoulder. Some people just can't handle being treated as equals. They have to make everything about—" He stopped himself, but the implication was clear. Captain Reynolds' expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Mr. Thornwell, I've been a pilot for 23 years. I've seen almost every kind of passenger conflict imaginable, and I've learned to recognize certain patterns. Patricia, you've been in the first-class cabin for the entire flight. What's your assessment?" Patricia didn't hesitate. "Captain Mr. Williams has been a model passenger. Quiet, polite, hasn't caused any disturbance. Mr. Thornwell, on the other hand, has been making comments not to Mr. Williams directly, but loud enough for everyone to hear about standards and who belongs in first class. Several other passengers have corroborated this." "That's a lie." Richard stood up, his voice rising dangerously. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Everyone's taking his side because they're afraid of being called racist." "Well, I'm not afraid. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Some people work hard their whole lives to earn the privilege of sitting in first class, and other people just—" "Mr. Thornwell," Captain Reynolds cut him off, his voice like steel, wrapped in velvet. "I'm going to stop you right there. First, you need to sit down immediately. Second, you need to lower your voice. And third, you need to understand something very clearly. On this aircraft, I'm the final authority. And based on what I've observed in the past 5 minutes, combined with the report from my flight attendant and the statements of multiple passengers, I'm making the following determination. You, sir, are the problem here, not Mr. Williams." Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "That's absurd. I'm the victim here." "You're the instigator," Captain Reynolds corrected, "and you're currently in violation of several FAA regulations regarding passenger conduct. I could, if I chose, to have you removed from this flight entirely before we take off. However, I'm going to give you one chance. You're going to sit down, you're going to remain quiet for the remainder of this flight, and you're going to stop bothering Mr. Williams. If you cannot do that, I will divert this plane to the nearest airport and have you removed. Do I make myself clear? This is outrageous. Do you know who I am? I don't care if you're the King of England," Captain Reynolds said flatly. "On this plane, you follow my rules or you don't fly. Now, are you going to comply, or do I need to call ground security?" Richard looked around the cabin, perhaps hoping for support, but found only hostile or indifferent faces. The other passengers had clearly chosen sides, and he was on the losing one. "Fine," he muttered, dropping back into his seat, "but I'll be filing a formal complaint with the airline. This is discrimination against valued customers. You're treating me like a criminal just because I dared to speak my mind." "You're welcome to file any complaint you wish once we land," Captain Reynolds said. "But for now, you will remain quiet. Mr. Williams," he turned to Marcus, "I apologize for this disruption. Please let Patricia know if you need anything at all for the remainder of the flight." "Thank you, Captain," Marcus said quietly. As Captain Reynolds returned to the cockpit, an interesting thing happened. The businessman across the aisle raised his coffee cup in a subtle toast to Marcus. The elderly woman 2 rows back gave him a supportive smile. Even a teenage girl in row 4, who'd been glued to her phone the entire time, looked up long enough to mouth, "That guy's an asshole," with the certainty of youth. Richard, meanwhile, sat in rigid silence, his face still flushed, his body language screaming offense and outrage. He pulled out his phone and began typing furiously, probably composing his complaint or venting to whoever would listen about the terrible injustice he'd suffered. Marcus returned to his book, but found he still couldn't focus. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind a familiar exhaustion. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and it wouldn't be the last. He dealt with Richards in boardrooms, in restaurants, in airport lounges, in hotel lobbies. Men and occasionally women who looked at his skin color and made immediate assumptions about his class, his education, his worth as a human being. The irony, of course, was that Marcus could probably buy Richards' precious 4 generations of manufacturing family business with the cash reserves his company had on hand. His personal net worth exceeded $300 million. He sat on the boards of 2 Fortune 500 companies. He'd been named to Forbes' list of most influential tech leaders for 3 consecutive years. He'd given the commencement speech at MIT last spring, donated $50 million to scholarship programs for underprivileged students in STEM fields, and had been invited to the White House twice to advise on cybersecurity policy. But none of that mattered to people like Richard Thornwell. All they saw was a black man in a seat they believed belonged to them. The flight continued in tense silence. Richard kept his word. He didn't speak again, but his body language remained hostile. He shifted constantly, sighed dramatically, and radiated resentment like heat from asphalt. Marcus tried to focus on his book, then his work, then finally just stared out the window at the clouds below, letting his mind wander. He thought about his grandmother, who'd cleaned houses in Atlanta to put his mother through nursing school. She'd told him stories about having to enter through the back door, about being paid less than white women for the same work, about the quiet indignities that had been her daily bread. When Marcus had been accepted to Georgia Tech with a full scholarship, she'd cried saying, "We're rising, baby. Slow, but we're rising." What would she make of this moment, he wondered. Would she see it as proof they were still rising, that he'd reached a height where he could confront men like Richard from a position of strength? Or would she see it as evidence that no matter how high they climbed, there would always be someone trying to push them back down? The flight attendant came by once more before they began their descent into Los Angeles. "Can I get you anything, Mr. Williams?" Patricia asked softly. "I'm fine, thank you. And Patricia, thank you for earlier, for backing me up." She squeezed his shoulder gently. "I've been doing this job for 30 years. I know trouble when I see it, and I know a gentleman when I see one. You handled that with more grace than he deserved." As the plane began its descent, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. We'll be landing at Los Angeles International Airport in approximately 15 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival. And I'd like to take a moment to make a special announcement." Richard perked up slightly, perhaps hoping this was some kind of apology or acknowledgement of his platinum elite status. "We have a very special passenger on board today," Captain Reynolds continued. "I don't usually do this, but given some of the tensions earlier in the flight, I think it's important. In Seat 2A, we have Mr. Marcus Williams, founder and CEO of Williams Technology Solutions. For those who don't know, WTS provides cybersecurity services to over 60% of Fortune 500 companies, as well as to several government agencies. Mr. Williams is one of the most respected tech leaders in the country, a philanthropist who's donated over $80 million to educational programs, and the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his contributions to national security." The cabin had gone completely silent. Even the engine noise seemed to fade into the background. Mr. Williams was recently named CEO of the Year by Tech Industry magazine and was the youngest person ever inducted into the Cybersecurity Hall of Fame. He holds 3 patents in encryption technology, has a PhD in computer science from Stanford, and somehow finds time to serve on the boards of multiple charitable organizations. So, Mr. Williams, on behalf of the entire crew, thank you for flying with us today. It's truly an honor." The captain paused, and when he spoke again, there was unmistakable steel in his voice. "And to all our passengers, let this be a reminder that we should never make assumptions about our fellow travelers based on appearances. You never know who you're sitting next to or who you're insulting." The silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly passengers began to clap. It started with the businessman across the aisle, spread to the elderly couple, and soon most of first class was applauding. Even some passengers from economy who'd clearly heard the announcement over the speakers could be heard clapping in the rows behind. Marcus felt his face grow warm. He'd never sought public acknowledgement like this, actively avoided it in most cases. But he understood what Captain Reynolds had done. He'd taken Richard's implicit assumptions and demolished them publicly, not for Marcus's benefit, but to make a point that needed making. He glanced at Richard and saw a man who'd gone beyond embarrassment to something approaching existential horror. Richard's face had drained of all color. His hands gripped the armrest so tightly his knuckles were white. He stared straight ahead, not meeting anyone's eyes, looking like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. I didn't, Richard whispered, but his voice died away. The plane touched down smoothly, and as it taxied to the gate, Marcus gathered his belongings. Around him, passengers were whispering, pulling out their phones to Google him, showing each other articles and photos. "Oh my God," someone murmured. "He's worth over $300 million. I read an article about him in Forbes. He grew up poor, single mother, worked 3 jobs to put himself through college. He turned down offers from Google and Apple to start his own company." Richard sat frozen, his face a mask of humiliation and horror. The full weight of his behavior, now viewed through the lens of who Marcus actually was, must have been crushing. He'd spent an hour insulting, belittling, and trying to intimidate one of the most successful men in America. He'd made assumptions based purely on skin color and had been spectacularly publicly wrong. As the plane reached the gate and the seatbelt sign dinged off, passengers began standing to collect their luggage. Marcus stood as well, reaching for his bag in the overhead compartment. Richard remained seated, seemingly paralyzed. The businessman from across the aisle approached Marcus. "Mr. Williams, I just wanted to say I'm a huge admirer of your work. I'm David Chen, VP of AIT Security at Hudson Financial. We've been using your systems for 3 years now, absolutely top-notch." "Thank you, David. I appreciate that." Several other passengers came up to shake his hand, apologize for Richard's behavior, or simply express their admiration. Marcus handled it all with practiced grace, though he was ready for this flight to be over. Finally, as the first-class cabin cleared, Richard stood. He looked at Marcus, opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. What could he possibly say? "Sorry I assumed you were too poor and unrefined to belong in first class. Sorry I spent an hour making racist comments because I couldn't imagine a black man might be more successful than me." "Mr. Williams," Richard finally managed his voice barely above a whisper. I apologize. I was completely out of line. I said things, assumed things, that were inexcusable. I don't know what else to say except I'm sorry." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Part of him wanted to accept the apology graciously and move on. Part of him wanted to really let Richard have it, to articulate exactly how his behavior had felt the weight of carrying that kind of prejudice on your shoulders day after day, flight after flight, year after year. In the end, he settled for something in between. "Mr. Thornwell, I accept your apology, but I want you to understand something. This wasn't just about me. Men like you have been treating men like me this way for centuries, making assumptions, demanding we prove we belong, treating our presence in your spaces as some kind of imposition. You didn't apologize because you suddenly realized your behavior was wrong. You apologized because you discovered I'm rich and successful, and suddenly I'm worthy of respect in your eyes. But here's the thing, deserved respect when you thought I was nobody. Every person in every seat on this plane deserved respect regardless of their bank account or their job title or the color of their skin." Richard nodded miserably. "You're right. You're absolutely right. I'll do better. I promise." "See that you do," Marcus said quietly, "because the next person you treat that way might not have a captain willing to make an announcement on their behalf, and they'll still deserve better than what you gave me today." Marcus walked off the plane, his head held high, leaving Richard standing alone in the empty first-class cabin with the weight of his own prejudices finally visible to him. Patricia stood at the door, her eyes glistening slightly. "Mr. Williams, thank you for your grace today. I've seen too many flights like this one. Too many good people made to feel small by people who should know better. Thank you for standing up for me, Patricia. Not everyone would have. It shouldn't be brave to tell the truth and do what's right, but I suppose in this world sometimes it is." Marcus made his way through the jetway and into LAX, where his assistant was waiting with a car. As he walked through the terminal, he felt the familiar exhaustion settling into his bones. Another city, another flight, another reminder that success didn't insulate you from small-minded bigotry. But there was also something else, a small sense of satisfaction. Richard Thornwell would think twice before making assumptions about the next black person he encountered. Maybe he'd even examine his own prejudices, though Marcus wasn't holding his breath on that one. And every passenger on that flight had been reminded that appearances can be deceiving, that respect should be given freely, not earned through revelations of status or wealth. It wasn't a victory exactly, but it was something. As Marcus climbed into the back of the black SUV, waiting at the curb, his phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Just saw something on Twitter about you in a plane incident. Are you okay, baby?" Marcus smiled. Of course, it was already on social media. Everything was these days. "I'm fine, Mom. Just another day in paradise. Call you tonight." He leaned back in the seat, closed his eyes, and allowed himself to imagine a world where he could just be a man on a plane, reading his book, going about his business. Where his success didn't have to be announced to command basic human decency. Where people like Richard Thornwell were relics of a dead past rather than uncomfortable reminders of an ongoing present. Someday maybe, but not today. The video appeared on Twitter approximately 47 minutes after Flight 337 landed at LAX. Marcus was in the back of his SUV, heading toward his company's West Coast headquarters in Culver City, when his phone began lighting up with notifications. At first he ignored them. His phone was always going off with something, but when his assistant Jennifer called for the third time in as many minutes, he answered. "Jennifer, I'm 10 minutes away from the office." "Marcus, you need to get on Twitter right now," Jennifer interrupted, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "Someone recorded the whole thing on the plane. The confrontation, the captain's announcement, everything. It's already got over 200,000 views and climbing fast." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Someone recorded it when I didn't see anyone with their phone out. The woman in row 4 apparently, the teenager, she posted it about 20 minutes ago with the caption, 'Racist Karen learns expensive lesson about assumptions.' Marcus, it's going viral, like really viral." Marcus pulled up Twitter on his phone, and sure enough, the first thing in his feed was the video. The thumbnail showed Richard's red face mid-rant, and the view count was already approaching 300,000. He pressed play. The video was remarkably clear, filmed from a diagonal angle that captured both Marcus and Richard perfectly. It began with Richard's comment about people who are just happy to be in first class at all, caught Marcus's measured response, and chronicled the entire escalating confrontation. The teenager had been clever with her editing, including text overlays that provided context. "Guy has been making racist comments for 45 minutes, and black man stays calm despite harassment." And the video quality was surprisingly good. But the real moment, the one that was clearly driving the viral spread, came at the end. The captain's announcement was captured in its entirety, the silence of the cabin deafening, and then the camera panned to Richard's face as the reality of his mistake became clear. The zoom on his expression, horror mixed with humiliation, mixed with the dawning realization that he'd just publicly humiliated himself, was almost artistic in its composition. The final shot was of passengers applauding and Marcus gathering his things with quiet dignity, while Richard sat frozen in his seat, a man whose worldview had just shattered around him. The comments section was already exploding. "OMA, ooh," the way his face went white when he realized who he was talking to. "This is what happens when you judge people by their appearance. Hope this dude learns something." Okay, but can we talk about how calm and classy Marcus Williams stayed? That man has more patience than I ever would. That captain is a real one. Called him out publicly. Love to see it. But not all the comments were supportive. As Marcus scrolled, he found the inevitable backlash. "This is race baiting. The white guy was rude, sure, but making it about race is a stretch. So we're just going to ruin this man's life over a disagreement about a seat cancel culture is out of control." Interesting how the airline just happened to make that announcement. Feels staged to me. Probably a publicity stunt. Marcus sighed and put his phone down. He'd been here before, though never quite at this scale. Every time a racial incident went viral, the same patterns emerged. Some people got it. Some people didn't want to get it. and some people actively fought against getting it because accepting the reality of everyday racism meant confronting uncomfortable truths about the world they lived in. Jennifer, he said into the phone, I need you to prepare a statement. Keep it brief. Something like, I appreciate the support, but I'd rather we focus on the broader issue of how we treat each other, regardless of race or perceived status. And get ahead of the press inquiries. I don't want this turning into a media circus. Too late for that, Jennifer replied. I've already got calls from CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and about a dozen other outlets. TMZ is trying to track down your hotel, and Marcus, your Twitter mentions have increased by about 10,000% in the last hour. Of course they have. Marcus rubbed his temples. Set up a press conference for tomorrow afternoon. I'll make one statement, answer a few questions, and that's it. And Jennifer, make sure someone's monitoring Richard Thornwell. If this spirals and he starts getting death threats or something, I want to know about it. You want to know if the guy who harassed you starts getting harassed. He was an asshole, Jennifer, but he doesn't deserve to have his life destroyed. What he needs is to learn and grow, not to be crucified on social media. You're a better person than me, Jennifer muttered. I'll set it up. See you in 10. Marcus hung up and stared out the window at the Los Angeles traffic. The city sprawled in all directions, a maze of highways and strip malls and palm trees, beautiful and ugly in equal measure. Somewhere in this city, Richard Thornwell was probably discovering that his private moment of prejudice was now a global public knowledge. His phone was probably exploding too, but with much different messages. Marcus pulled up Twitter again and searched for Richard's name. The doxing had already begun. Someone had found Richard's LinkedIn profile and posted screenshots. Another person had identified Thornwell Industries and was calling for boycotts. A thread with over 50,000 likes was collecting receipts of other problematic statements Richard had made on his own social media over the years, complaints about political correctness, shares of articles about reverse discrimination, likes on posts questioning Black Lives Matter. Good Lord, Marcus muttered. Richard had essentially built his own funeral pyre with years of digital breadcrumbs, and the plane incident was just the match that lit it. But then Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. Someone had posted Richard's home address along with a photo of his house. The comments underneath were getting increasingly threatening. Someone should teach this racist a lesson he won't forget. I live in Atlanta. Might have to pay Mr. Thornwell a visit. White privilege is about to meet real consequences. Marcus immediately called Jennifer back. Get me Richard Thornwell's phone number, now. I don't care how you do it, but I need to talk to him within the hour. Marcus, are you serious? Why would you? Because he's about to get hurt, Jennifer. People are posting his address online. This is going too far. He brought this on himself. Maybe so, but I'm not going to stand by and watch vigilante justice play out because someone was rude to me on a plane. Get me his number. 45 minutes later, Marcus was in his office at WTS headquarters staring at his phone with Richard Thornwell's number on the screen. Around him, the Los Angeles branch of his company hummed with activity. Through the glass walls of his corner office, he could see his employees working, most of them probably aware by now of the viral video. Several had already stopped by to express their support or share their own stories of similar encounters. He dialed the number. Richard answered on the first ring, his voice tight with stress. Who is this? Mr. Thornwell, this is Marcus Williams. A long silence, then, how did you get this number? That's not important. What's important is that I just saw people posting your address online. You need to take your family and get somewhere safe. Tonight, maybe for the next few days until this dies down. Another silence. When Richard spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Why are you calling me? Why do you care? Because what you did was wrong, but you don't deserve to be attacked in your home. You don't deserve to have people threatening your family. That's not justice, it's just more hatred. I don't understand, Richard said quietly. I said terrible things to you. I judged you, insulted you, tried to make you feel small. And now you're calling to warn me after everything. Yes, Mr. Thornwell, because this isn't about revenge. It's not about making you suffer. It's about hopefully teaching people to do better. But Twitter mobs don't teach, they destroy. And I don't want that on my conscience, even if you brought some of it on yourself. Marcus could hear Richard breathing on the other end of the line, could almost feel the man struggling with emotions he probably couldn't name. I have 3 children, Richard had said finally. 2 daughters in college, a son in high school. My wife, she's devastated. She's already getting calls from friends asking if it's true, if I really said those things. My company's phone has been ringing nonstop. The board called an emergency meeting. My LinkedIn has about 1,000 angry messages. My email has been hacked or something I'm getting hundreds of. God, some of them are just evil. Telling me I should kill myself, that the world would be better without people like me. I'm sorry, Marcus said in men. I really am. Not sorry that you're facing consequences for your actions, but sorry that it's happening this way, with this intensity. Is this what it's like for you? Richard asked suddenly. This feeling of the whole world judging you for just existing, for making mistakes. Is this what I made you feel on that plane? Marcus considered the question carefully. Not exactly. What you're experiencing is a mob reaction to specific behavior captured on video. What people like me experience is something more insidious and constant. It's not one dramatic moment, it's 1,000 small moments. It's being followed in stores. It's watching people cross the street when they see you coming. It's having to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good. It's the accumulation of a million little cuts, most of them never caught on camera, never going viral, just constant. How do you stand it? Richard's voice cracked. I've been dealing with this for 3 hours and I feel like I'm losing my mind. You learn, Marcus said simply. You develop thick skin. You find community with people who understand. You channel the anger into something productive. You remember that the opinion of someone who judges you by your skin color says more about them than it does about you. It's exhausting, but you learn. Richard was quiet for a long moment. What do I do now? How do I fix this? You can't fix it, not really, not right away, but you can learn from it. You can examine why you felt entitled to treat me that way. You can think about all the other times you've made assumptions about people based on how they look. You can have hard conversations with your family about prejudice and privilege. You can commit to doing better, not just in public, but in private too. And eventually, if you really do change, people will notice. But it won't be fast and it won't be easy. Would you consider meeting with me privately? I know I have no right to ask, but I feel like I need to understand. Really understand. Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose. This was already taking more emotional energy than he'd anticipated. Maybe, not right now. This is too fresh, too raw. But in a few weeks after things calm down, if you're serious about learning and growing, send me an email. We'll see. Thank you, Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. And Mr. Williams, I am sorry. Truly. Not just because I got caught or because you turned out to be someone important. I'm sorry because I was cruel to another human being for no reason except my own insecurity and prejudice. That's not who I want to be. Then don't be that person, Marcus said. It's that simple and that hard. After they hung up, Marcus sat in his office for a long time watching the sun set over Los Angeles. The sky turned orange, then pink, then purple, and finally faded to that unique smoggy darkness that was never quite black in the city. His phone kept buzzing. Jennifer sent him the prepared statement for tomorrow's press conference. His mother called to check on him again. His business partner David texted to ask if he wanted to grab dinner and talk. Various media outlets continued their requests for interviews, and the video kept spreading. By the time Marcus left his office at 8 p.m., it had over 5 million views. #Racist Richard was trending nationwide. Thornwell Industries had released a statement saying they were looking into the matter. Someone had created a GoFundMe for Marcus, though for what purpose was unclear since he was a multimillionaire, that had somehow raised $70,000 before Marcus asked Jennifer to have it taken down and donated to racial justice organizations. The teenager who'd filmed it all, a girl named Aisha Thompson, had given an interview to a local news station. I started recording because I could tell something was about to happen, she explained to the camera. I've seen that look before, when someone's about to say something racist, but they're trying to dance around it. And I just thought, if this goes where I think it's going, people need to see it. People need to understand that this stuff still happens every day to people who don't have millions of dollars or a captain willing to stand up for them. Marcus watched the interview on his phone during the car ride back to his hotel. Aisha was 17, articulate, passionate, and according to the news report, she was planning to study journalism at Howard University next fall. He made a mental note to have Jennifer set up a scholarship in her name. The next day's press conference was held in the main atrium of WTS headquarters, a space designed to impress with its soaring ceiling, its sleek modern design, and its wall of windows overlooking the LA skyline. About 50 journalists crowded into the space, cameras and microphones at the ready. Marcus stood at a podium wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, white shirt, no tie. He looked calm, composed, every inch the successful CEO he was. Only Jennifer, standing off to the side, could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his jaw was set just a fraction tighter than usual. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began. "I'm going to make a brief statement and then I'll take a few questions. First, I want to address what happened on Flight 337. Yes, I experienced racially motivated harassment from a fellow passenger. Yes, it was uncomfortable and unpleasant. Yes, it's frustrating that this kind of thing still happens in 2023. But I don't want this to become solely about me or about Mr. Thornwell." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled journalists. "What happened on that plane happens to Black people and other people of color every single day in this country. We are questioned in spaces we have every right to occupy. We are asked to prove we belong. We are treated with suspicion and hostility simply because of the color of our skin. The only reason my experience got attention is because it was caught on video, because a brave young woman decided to document it, and because it was revealed that I'm someone with status and wealth. But here's the truth, I deserve to be treated with respect, even if I weren't a CEO, even if I were unemployed, even if I were wearing torn jeans and a t-shirt instead of designer clothes. Human dignity isn't something we should have to earn through professional success or financial achievement. It's something we're born with." A reporter raised her hand, but Marcus continued. "As for Mr. Thornwell, I've spoken with him. He's expressed genuine remorse, and I believe him. I'm not interested in destroying his life or his family. I'm interested in this being a learning moment, both for him personally and for our society more broadly. The violent threats against him and his family need to stop. That's not justice, and it's not what I want to come from this situation. If you really want to honor what happened on that plane, don't send death threats. Instead, examine your own biases. Have hard conversations with your family and friends. Support organizations working toward racial justice. And treat every person you meet with the dignity they deserve, regardless of how they look or what you assume about their circumstances." He paused for a sip of water, then nodded. "I'll take a few questions now." Hands shot up across the room. Marcus pointed to a woman from the Washington Post. "Mr. Williams, some people are saying this was a publicity stunt staged to promote your company or your personal brand. How do you respond to that?" Marcus's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened slightly. "I respond by saying that anyone who thinks I'd stage being racially harassed for publicity has a deeply cynical view of the world. I have all the publicity I need. What I don't need is to be reminded 40,000 feet in the air that some people still see my skin color before they see my humanity." A man from CNN was next. "Do you think the airline handled the situation appropriately?" "I think Captain Reynolds handled it excellently. He listened to all parties, made a fair assessment, and took decisive action. Patricia, the flight attendant, was also outstanding. They both did their jobs with professionalism and integrity. As for the airline's policies more broadly, I'll say this. I've been flying for over 20 years, and I've experienced this kind of thing before. Not always this dramatically, but it happens. Airlines need to be proactive in training their staff to recognize and address discrimination, and they need to have clear protocols for handling these situations. It shouldn't be up to individual flight attendants and pilots to figure it out on the fly." A reporter from Fox News stood up. "Mr. Williams, do you think Mr. Thornwell should lose his job over this?" Marcus took a breath. This was the question he'd been expecting, the one that would define the narrative. "No," he said firmly. "I don't think one moment of bad behavior, however ugly, should result in someone losing their livelihood and ability to support their family. What I think should happen is that Mr. Thornwell should face consequences proportional to his actions, perhaps sensitivity training, perhaps a suspension, perhaps a very serious conversation with his employer about the company's values. But destroying someone's career over this, that's not productive. It doesn't actually advance racial justice. It just gives people something to point to when they claim cancel culture has gone too far. The room erupted with follow-up questions, but Marcus held up his hand. What I want people to understand is that this isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about growth and change. Mr. Thornwell made a mistake, a serious mistake rooted in prejudice that he's probably harbored his whole life without examining. But he's expressed genuine remorse, and I believe people can change. I believe in redemption. What kind of society are we if we don't allow people room to learn from their mistakes and become better? An older journalist from the Times stood up. Mr. Williams, you mentioned it, you've experienced this kind of thing before. Can you elaborate? Marcus nodded slowly. I've been stopped by police while jogging in my own neighborhood because I look suspicious. I've had women clutch their purses tighter when I've entered an elevator. I've been followed in stores by security guards. I've had business colleagues assume I'm in the wrong meeting room or that I'm there to fix the computers rather than lead the presentation. I once had a car dealership refuse to let me test drive a vehicle because they didn't believe I could afford it. This was when I was already worth over $100 million. It's death by 1,000 cuts, these constant reminders that some people see you as less than as someone who needs to constantly prove their right to exist in certain spaces. He leaned forward, his intensity palpable. And here's the thing that people who don't experience this don't understand. It's exhausting. It's a constant low-level stress that never quite goes away. You're always braced for the next incident, always having to decide whether to speak up or let it go, always calculating whether making an issue of it will make things better or worse. And the most frustrating part is that the people who need to understand this the most are often the ones most resistant to hearing it. The press conference continued for another 20 minutes with Marcus fielding questions about his company, about his philanthropic work, about his advice for young people of color entering the business world. He handled every question with the same measured grace, never quite losing his temper, but never backing down from hard truths either. As it wrapped up, a young black reporter from a smaller outlet asked one final question. Mr. Williams, what do you want people to take away from this? What's the message? Marcus smiled slightly, the first genuine smile of the conference. The message is simple. See people, really see them. Not their skin color, not their clothes, not your assumptions about who they might be. See their humanity, treat them with respect. And if you catch yourself making assumptions based on how someone looks, stop and ask yourself why. Where did that assumption come from? Is it fair? Is it kind? Is it true? And then do better. That's all any of us can do, recognize our biases and actively work to overcome them. That's how we build a better world, one interaction at a time. The journalists applauded an unusual break in professional protocol that suggested Marcus had struck a chord. As he left the podium, Jennifer was already on her phone fielding the next wave of media requests. Good job, she murmured as Marcus passed. That should help calm things down. But if anything, the statement only intensified interest in the story. By evening, clips from the press conference were being shared across social media. News analysis shows dissected every word. Pundits on both sides of the political spectrum weighed in with their takes. Conservative commentators praised Marcus for his stance against cancel culture, while conveniently ignoring the racial elements of the story. Progressive commentators appreciated his call for systemic change, while criticizing what they saw as being too soft on Richard Thornwell. Everyone had an opinion. And through it all, the video kept spreading. 10 million views, 15 million, 20 million. It was dubbed into Spanish, subtitled in French, dissected frame by frame on YouTube reaction channels. Memes proliferated. Someone auto-tuned the captain's announcement into a song. A comedian did a 5-minute bit about it on late-night television. Richard Thornwell became a symbol of white privilege, of casual racism, of assumptions and entitlement. Marcus Williams became a symbol, too, of dignity under pressure, of success, despite obstacles, of grace in the face of hatred. Neither man was entirely comfortable with their symbolic status, but that ship had sailed. 3 weeks after the incident, Marcus sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop in downtown Atlanta waiting. The place was small, locally owned, the kind of spot that prized good coffee and genuine atmosphere over Instagram aesthetics. Marcus had chosen it, deliberately neutral territory, private enough for a serious conversation, but public enough to keep things civil. Richard Thornwell arrived exactly on time, looking like a man who hadn't slept well in weeks. His expensive suit hung a bit looser on his frame, suggesting weight loss. His face was drawn shadows under his eyes, and he carried himself with the cautious wariness of someone expecting another blow to fall at any moment. "Thank you for meeting with me," Richard said as he sat down. His voice was quiet, stripped of the booming confidence that had characterized it on the plane. "I wasn't sure you would." Marcus gestured to the barista who brought over 2 coffees without being asked. Marcus had arranged it ahead of time. "I said I would. I keep my word." They sat in silence for a moment, both men adding cream and sugar to their cups, the ritual providing a brief respite from the weight of what needed to be said. "I've done a lot of thinking these past few weeks," Richard began. "About that day, about my behavior, about everything. I want you to know that I've started seeing a therapist, someone who specializes in implicit bias and racial reconciliation. It's been eye-opening and painful." "Growth usually is," Marcus said neutrally. "The board put me on a 6-month unpaid leave," Richard continued. "Not suspension exactly, but not a suspension either. They're calling it a sabbatical. They want me to complete a series of diversity training programs before they'll consider letting me return. My wife, we're in counseling too. She was horrified by the video, said she didn't recognize the man she saw on that plane. My kids are embarrassed to be associated with me. My son changed his Instagram handle because he was getting harassment at school." Richard wrapped both hands around his coffee cup as if seeking warmth. "I've been doxxed, as you know. We had to move temporarily because someone spray-painted slurs on our house. Ironic, right? Me experiencing a tiny fraction of what Black families have experienced for generations. My LinkedIn has been bombarded with messages, some supportive, many more, calling me every name imaginable. I've lost friends. People I've known for decades won't return my calls." Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression neutral. "But you know what the worst part is?" Richard looked up, meeting Marcus's eyes for the first time. "The worst part is realizing that everyone was right to judge me. I wasn't just having a bad day on that plane. That was me. That's who I've been in small ways and sometimes big ways my entire life. The therapist helped me see patterns I'd been blind to, or willfully ignorant of. The jokes I've laughed at, the assumptions I've made, the ways I've benefited from a system rigged in my favor while telling myself it was all merit and hard work." He paused, his voice becoming thick with emotion. "I've been racist, Mr. Williams. Not in the obvious hood-wearing, slur-shouting way. In the insidious, everyday way. The way that's almost worse because it hides behind politeness and civility and claims of colorblindness. And the most shameful part is that it took being publicly humiliated for me to see it." Marcus took a sip of his coffee, considering his response carefully. "The fact that you can see it now matters. Not everyone does. Many people in your position would double down, play the victim, claim they were misunderstood or taken out of context. The fact that you're doing the hard work of actually examining yourself, that counts for something." "Does it?" Richard asked bitterly. "Does it really? Because I still said those things? I still treated you that way. The fact that I feel bad about it now doesn't undo the harm." "No, it doesn't," Marcus agreed. "But it's a start. Redemption isn't instant. It's not one conversation or one apology or even months of therapy. It's a lifelong commitment to doing better, even when it's hard, even when no one's watching." Richard nodded slowly. "I want to understand, really understand, not just intellectually but in my bones. What was it like for you in that moment when I was making those comments, trying to get you to give up your seat, treating you like you were less than human?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, debating how much emotional labor he wanted to invest in this conversation. But Richard's question seemed genuine, his desire to understand real, rather than performative. "It felt familiar," Marcus said finally. "That's what was so exhausting about it. It wasn't shocking or surprising. It was just another Tuesday, another person making assumptions about me based on my skin color. Another situation where I had to decide whether to speak up or let it go, whether fighting back would make things better or worse." He paused, marshaling his thoughts. There's this thing we call the talk in black families. Not the talk about sex, that's the other talk. The talk I'm referring to is the one where parents sit their kids down and explain how to interact with police, how to keep your hands visible, how to speak calmly and respectfully no matter how you're being treated, how to de-escalate, how to survive an encounter that could go very wrong very quickly. My mother gave me that talk when I was 8 years old. 8. Because she knew that my blackness could be perceived as a threat even when I was just a child. Richard's face had gone pale. Jesus. And that's just one aspect of it, Marcus continued. There's also the constant low-level vigilance, checking your surroundings, being aware of how others perceive you, modulating your behavior, your tone, your body language, your clothes to make white people comfortable. That's what I was doing on that plane, actually. I deliberately dressed casually, chose a seat where I could read quietly, did everything I could to be non-threatening and invisible. And still you saw me as a problem. Because I'm a racist, Richard said flatly. Let's call it what it is. Because you've internalized racist beliefs and assumptions, Marcus corrected gently. There's a difference. Racism isn't just active hatred. It's the water we all swim in. It's the messages society sends about who has value and who doesn't. It's the default assumptions we make without even realizing we're making them. White people aren't born racist, but they're raised in a society that privileges them in countless ways while teaching them that those privileges are normal and earned. Richard was quiet for a long moment. How do I fix it? How do I become not that? You're already doing it, Marcus said. Therapy, education, hard conversations, sitting here listening, even when it's uncomfortable. But it can't stop there. It has to become part of how you move through the world. When you return to work, how will you approach hiring? Will you make assumptions about candidates based on their names or appearance? When you're in meetings, whose ideas do you automatically give more weight to? When you're making business decisions, are you considering how they'll impact communities of color? Those are the questions you need to keep asking yourself. I've already started, Richard said. I've been reading James Baldwin, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Robin DiAngelo, Ibram X. Kendi. I've been listening to podcasts, watching documentaries. My therapist gave me a whole curriculum to work through. And I've been thinking about my company. We say we value diversity, but our executive team is all white men. Our board is 11 people, 10 white men and 1 white woman. We talk about meritocracy, but who's defining merit? Who's getting access to opportunities? He rubbed his face with both hands. There's so much I was blind to, or chose to be blind to. It's overwhelming. It should be overwhelming, Marcus said, because the problem is massive and systemic and hundreds of years old. But that doesn't mean individual actions don't matter. Every person who does the work, who questions their assumptions, who uses their privilege to open doors for others, that matters. Change happens both top down and bottom up. A young black woman approached their table hesitant but determined. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Williams, I just wanted to say thank you for everything. My brother showed me the video from the plane and the way you handled that situation. It meant a lot. You didn't get angry or violent, didn't play into stereotypes, just stood your ground with dignity. That's powerful. Marcus smiled warmly. Thank you. What's your name? Keisha. I'm a junior at Georgia State studying computer science. Are you enjoying it? Mostly, yeah, though it can be isolating. There aren't many women in the program, and even fewer black women. Sometimes I feel like I have to prove I belong there, you know. Marcus nodded. I know exactly. Listen, here's my card. Email my assistant, Jennifer. Her contact is on there. We have an internship program at WTS specifically for underrepresented students in tech. I'd like you to apply. Keisha's eyes went wide. Seriously, oh my God. Thank you, I will, I promise. After she left, practically floating, Richard spoke quietly. You do that often, just hand out opportunities like that. Whenever I can, Marcus replied, because I remember what it was like being the only black student in most of my computer science classes. Remember feeling like I had to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. If I can make that journey easier for someone else, why wouldn't I? That's the difference between us, Richard said. You made it and turned around to pull others up. I made it and pulled up the ladder behind me, convinced I'd done it all on my own merit without acknowledging every advantage I'd been given. So change it, Marcus said simply. You're in a position of power at a manufacturing company. How many people of color work there? In what positions? What's your company's relationship with minority-owned suppliers? Are you contracting with Black-owned businesses? Are you recruiting at HBCUs? Are you offering mentorship programs? There are 1,000 ways you could use your influence for good. Richard pulled out his phone and started taking notes. I'm writing this down. All of it. I want to bring proposals to the board when my leave is over. They talked for another hour, the conversation ranging from personal stories to systemic issues, from Richard's journey of self-examination to Marcus's experiences building a company while Black. It wasn't comfortable. There were moments when Marcus had to pause and take a breath, moments when Richard looked like he might cry, but it was real. Finally, as the coffee shop began preparing to close, Richard asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him. Do you forgive me? Marcus considered this carefully. I don't know if forgiveness is mine to give. You didn't just harm me personally. Your attitudes and behaviors multiplied across millions of people like you create and perpetuate systems that harm entire communities. But can I acknowledge your remorse and your commitment to change? Can I support your journey toward becoming better? Yes, I can do that. That's more than I deserve, Richard said quietly. Maybe, but it's what I'm offering. As they stood to leave, Richard extended his hand. Marcus looked at it for a moment, then shook it. Not a gesture of complete forgiveness or friendship, but an acknowledgement of shared humanity and the possibility of growth. Thank you, Richard said, for your grace, for your time, for not giving up on the possibility that people can change. Don't thank me yet, Marcus replied with a slight smile. The work is just beginning. And I'll be watching Mr. Thornwell. A lot of people will be. You said you want to change to do better. Prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Sustained, consistent actions over months and years. That's how you earn back trust. That's how you build a new legacy. The two men walked out of the coffee shop together, an unlikely pair captured by a photographer from a local news outlet who'd somehow gotten wind of the meeting. The photo would run the next day with the headline, From Conflict to Conversation, Marcus Williams and Richard Thornwell meet face to face. The comment section would be predictably divided. Some would praise Marcus for his willingness to engage. Others would criticize him for giving Richard a platform. Some would celebrate Richard's apparent growth. Others would remain skeptical that real change was possible. But Marcus wasn't particularly concerned with public opinion anymore. He'd said what he needed to say at the press conference. He'd set boundaries around his time and emotional energy. This meeting with Richard had been for Richard's benefit more than his own, a chance to see if the man's remorse was genuine, if his commitment to change was real. And Marcus had come away cautiously optimistic. Richard had a long way to go. Years of unlearning and relearning. Years of making mistakes and correcting course. Years of choosing discomfort over complacency. But at least he was willing to treat it by. That evening, Marcus sat in his hotel room overlooking Atlanta, the city where his grandmother had cleaned houses and his mother had worked double shifts as a nurse to give him opportunities she'd never had. He thought about how far he'd come from a kid in a rough neighborhood who'd learned to code on a donated computer to a CEO running a multi-million-dollar company. He thought about all the Richard Thornwells he'd encountered along the way, the ones who'd underestimated him, tried to block his path, made him prove himself again and again. And he thought about the young people like Keisha, brilliant and talented, and still having to navigate spaces that weren't built for them, still having to prove they belonged, still carrying the weight of representation on their shoulders. The work was never done. That was the reality. You could achieve every conventional marker of success, wealth, power, respect, and you'd still encounter people who saw your skin color before they saw anything else. You'd still have to have the talk with your children. You'd still experience the 1,000 small cuts of everyday racism. But you kept going. You kept building. You kept opening doors for the next generation. You kept believing, despite all evidence to the contrary sometimes, that people could change and society could evolve. Marcus picked up his phone and called his mother. "Hey, baby," she answered, her voice warm and familiar. "Saw you were all over the news again today. Meeting with that man who was so awful to you. Why'd you do that, Marcus?" Why give him the time of day? Because Grandma taught me to see the humanity in everyone, Marcus replied, even people who don't see it in me. And because if I write off everyone who's ever made a racist assumption, I'll spend my whole life angry and isolated. Sometimes people can learn. Sometimes they can change. I had to at least give him the chance to trust him. His mother was quiet for a moment. Your grandmother would be proud of you, the man you've become, the grace you've shown. But she'd also tell you it's okay to rest sometimes. Okay to let other people carry the weight of education and explanation. You don't have to be strong all the time. I know, Mom, and I won't be. There will be plenty of Richard Thornwells I don't give second chances to. Plenty of situations where I just walk away. This one, I don't know. Something told me it might actually matter. Well, your instincts are usually good, baby. Trust them. After they hung up, Marcus returned to the window. The Atlanta skyline glittered in the darkness. Countless lights representing countless lives. Countless stories, countless moments of connection and conflict. Somewhere in this city, Richard Thornwell was probably sitting in his temporary housing, processing their conversation, maybe questioning whether he was capable of the change he'd promised. Maybe he'd follow through. Maybe he'd backslide. Maybe he'd end up somewhere in the middle, better than he was, but not as transformed as he hoped. And somewhere else in the city, maybe Keisha was telling her family about meeting Marcus Williams, about the internship opportunity, about feeling seen and valued and believed in. Maybe that moment would change the trajectory of her life. Maybe she'd go on to build something amazing. Maybe years from now, she'd be in Marcus's position, meeting with someone who'd wronged her, trying to decide if second chances were worth giving. The cycle continued generation after generation. Progress measured in inches and miles in individual moments, in sweeping changes in private reckonings, in public reckonings. Marcus wasn't naive. He knew that meeting with Richard wouldn't change the world. Knew that even if Richard became the most dedicated anti-racist advocate imaginable, it would barely make a dent in the massive structures of inequality and injustice that defined American society. But it was something. One person choosing growth over defensiveness. One conversation that might ripple outward in ways impossible to predict or measure. One small act of faith in the possibility of redemption. Sometimes that had to be enough. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. New speaking engagement request. They want you to talk about grace in the face of conflict at a leadership conference. $75K for 1 hour. Interim interested. Marcus smiled and typed back. Not interested, but see if they'd rather donate that $75K to organizations doing racial justice work. Then I'll do it for free. A moment later, you're impossible, but I'll ask. Marcus set down his phone and returned to the window one last time. Tomorrow he'd fly back to LA. He'd return to running his company, managing his teams, developing new technologies, building systems to protect people's data and digital lives. But tonight he was just a man in a hotel room thinking about a conversation in a coffee shop, about the weight of representation, about the exhausting necessity of hope. The city lights flickered below, each one a story, each one a life, each one a possibility. Marcus Williams, CEO and dreamer fighter and bridge builder, turned away from the window and toward whatever came next. 6 months later, the email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was in his San Francisco office reviewing security protocols for a new government contract when Jennifer knocked on his door. You're going to want to see this, she said, her expression inscrutable. She handed him her tablet open to an email from Richard Thornwell. Dear Mr. Williams, it began, I wanted to update you on my journey over the past 6 months. As you know, I completed my leave from Thornwell Industries along with extensive diversity training therapy and education programs. I'm pleased to report that the board voted unanimously last week to reinstate me, but not in my previous role. I proposed and they accepted the creation of a new position, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. My first act was to hire a team of experts led by a brilliant Black woman named Dr. Angela Morrison to conduct a comprehensive audit of our company's practices from hiring to promotion to supplier relationships. The results were sobering but not surprising. We have a lot of work to do. I've also personally funded a scholarship program for students of color pursuing careers in manufacturing and engineering, $2 million over the next 5 years. It's not enough. It's not even close to enough, but it's a start. I wanted to thank you for giving me that afternoon in the coffee shop, for seeing the possibility of change in me when I could barely see it in myself, for holding me accountable while still offering grace. You didn't know me that, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to prove I was worthy of it. I'm including a link to an interview I did with NPR about my journey. I hope I did justice to the lessons you tried to teach me. And I hope perhaps that we might meet again sometime, not as a man seeking forgiveness and a man granting it, but as two people committed to making the world a little bit better. With profound gratitude and respect, Richard Thornwell. Marcus read the email twice, then clicked on the NPR link. The interview was 20 minutes long. He listened to Richard talk about his transformation with something approaching eloquence, acknowledging his prejudice, describing his journey of unlearning, talking about the work still ahead. I used to think I was a good person who'd had a bad moment, Richard said in the interview. But the truth is I was a person with unchallenged racist beliefs who'd been having bad moments my entire life. The plane incident was just the first time someone held up a mirror. And I'm grateful, as painful as it was, because I needed to see myself clearly. When the interviewer asked about Marcus, Richard's voice became thick with emotion. Mr. Williams showed me what grace looks like, what strength looks like. He could have destroyed me, could have leveraged his platform and his power to make sure I never recovered from my mistakes. Instead, he gave me a chance to be better, not for his benefit, but for mine. That's a debt I can never fully repay. Marcus sat back in his chair, processing. Was this performative? Partially, maybe. But there was something in Richard's voice and the specific actions he'd taken that suggested real change, real commitment. So, Jennifer asked from the doorway, what do you think? I think people are complicated, Marcus said finally. I think transformation is possible but never guaranteed. I think Richard Thornwell has a long way to go, but at least he's walking in the right direction. Are you going to respond? Marcus considered this. Yeah, I think I will. He opened his laptop and began typing. Dear Richard, thank you for the update. I'm encouraged by the steps you're taking, both the internal work and the external actions. A few thoughts. First, remember that this journey doesn't end. There's no point where you get to declare yourself fixed and stop examining your biases and assumptions. This is lifelong work. Second, center the voices and experiences of people of color in everything you do. Your new diversity team should have real power, real budget, real authority to make changes. Don't just create positions and programs for optics. Third, be prepared for skepticism. Many people won't believe your transformation is genuine. Some of that skepticism will be unfair, but much of it will be earned. The only way to overcome it is through consistent action over years, not months. Fourth, use your position to advocate for change beyond your company. What you learned, what you experienced, share it. Make yourself uncomfortable by speaking at conferences, writing articles, having hard conversations with other white executives who might listen to you in ways they wouldn't listen to me. And finally, remember that this isn't really about you and me. It's about creating a world where the next Black executive doesn't have to deal with what I dealt with on that plane, where young people like Keisha don't have to prove they belong, where my future children won't need the talk. That's the real work. That's the real measure of transformation. Keep going. I'm watching. So are a lot of other people. Respectfully, Marcus Williams. He hit send before he could overthink it. That evening, Marcus attended a fundraiser for his scholarship program. The room was full of students who'd benefited from the fun young people of color studying technology, engineering, mathematics, computer science, future founders and CEOs and innovators. One of them, a young man named Deshaun, approached Marcus during the reception. Mr. Williams, I just wanted to say thank you. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. Without your scholarship, I'd be working 2 jobs and taking classes part-time if I could afford it at all. Instead, I'm at MIT studying artificial intelligence, and I'm actually thriving. You gave me that. Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his throat that came when the work became real, when he could see the direct impact of his choices. No, Deshaun, you gave that to yourself. The scholarship just removed some barriers. Your intelligence, your hard work, your dedication, that's all you. Still, Deshaun insisted, you saw worth in people like me. You invested in us. That matters more than you probably know. After he walked away, Marcus stood alone for a moment, a glass of champagne in his hand, watching these brilliant young people network and laugh and dream. This was why the work mattered. This was why you kept going, even when it was exhausting, even when you had to sit across from someone like Richard Thornwell and explain again what should be obvious. Because maybe Richard would actually change. Maybe his company would become a model for inclusive practices. Maybe some other executive would see his transformation and examine their own biases. Maybe, or maybe not. Maybe Richard would backslide. Maybe his commitment would fade. Maybe this would all turn out to be an elaborate exercise in image rehabilitation. But these students, they were real. Their potential was real. The opportunities they'd create, the innovations they'd build, the doors they'd open for the next generation, that was real. And it was enough. Marcus raised his glass in a silent toast to his grandmother, who'd cleaned houses, to his mother, who'd worked double shifts, to every person of color who'd paved the way for him, who'd fought battles he'd never have to fight, who'd made it possible for him to be here now, funding scholarships and building companies, and occasionally giving second chances to people who probably didn't deserve them. The work continued. The struggle persisted, but so did the hope. And sometimes on evenings like this, that hope felt almost tangible, not naive or foolish, but hard-won and realistic, tempered by experience, but not extinguished by it. Marcus Williams, 43 years old, CEO, philanthropist, survivor of 1,000 microaggressions and a few not-so-micro ones, turned back to the party. There were hands to shake, stories to hear, futures to invest in. The plane incident had become part of his story, but it wasn't his whole story. It was one chapter in a much larger narrative about resilience and grace, about fighting for dignity while refusing to become bitter, about building ladders while others were busy building walls. Tomorrow he'd be back in meetings and on conference calls, managing crises and making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of customers. But tonight he was here in this room full of possibilities, surrounded by young people who represented both the challenges that remained and the promise of what could be. It wasn't victory exactly, but it was something like it, something worth celebrating, something worth fighting for. Marcus smiled, took a sip of his champagne, and walked back into the crowd. The end. Author's note. This story is fiction, but the experiences it depicts are drawn from the real stories of countless people of color who navigate spaces where their presence is questioned, their dignity challenged, and their humanity ignored. To every person who's ever been told they don't belong, who's had to prove their worth over and over again, who's responded to hatred with grace, your strength is seen, your dignity is real, and your humanity is undeniable. May we all work toward a world where stories like Marcus's become obsolete, not because we stop talking about them, but because we stop needing to.